we are honored today to have our pastor, Father Fernando, and he is going to speak about his trip to Poland and the impact of St. John Paul and what he did to topple communism, in addition to that, to make the world such a better place. And Father Fernando has put a lot of effort into this, and we really look forward to it, and we thank him for this presentation, and I'll give it to Father Fernando right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh. Good morning. Before I go on with my presentation, I would like to thank those of you who invited me to come and share this moment with you, especially Ida and Frank. There were several visits, and in those visits we were discussing what to do this morning. And I was just back from Poland from a pilgrimage, and I mentioned that to them, and they liked the idea. And so that's how we came with this subject for today. Of course, to speak about John Paul II is a gigantic task, because he's the Pope of the century, and also somebody who had a tremendous impact all over the world, not just Poland. But we decided to just narrow it down to Poland, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to live here in weeks. So that's how we came with this idea about Poland. Let me say, I'm going to do this presentation first, speaking and just reminding ourselves about some few things about John Paul. Then we will move into his impact on Poland. I would like to, say that John Paul, I guess for the most part, for most of us, he was like the main pope. I grew up, I remember when he was elected and when he was shot in 1981, and the impact that has had all over the world. And I grew up with him. He was an inspiration. He was the pope of the people. He was leaving the Vatican and visiting all the corners of the world, and that was so amazing, so great. So for me, it was a great inspiration, even for just for me to just look into the priesthood, a great inspiration like Mother Teresa of Calcutta and so many others, but John Paul, one of them. Let me say that in order to understand the impact and the strength that John Paul had, and the desire that he had to transform some realities of society, and especially in Poland, we have to know also the background of John Paul. He was born in Wadowice in 1920, May 18, 1920. Wadowice is, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours from, or probably a little more from Krakow. It's a small town. And so here, he lived beside the church. So from his beginning, he was attached to the church. No wonder he, then later became an altar server and so on. He was like chosen from the beginning to do what he did do in life. I was there in Wadowice, and I had the blessing to go through the museum that they have over there, a marvelous, beautiful, very modern museum that goes through all his life, and it's just besides the church. Even from his room where he used to sleep, he was able to see, the entrance to the church on the side, and it was just such a wonderful location for meditation, for prayer, and so on. Now, his name was Karol Joseph Wojtyla, like his father, and his life is unique. Well, everybody's life is unique, but his life was really very unique. when he was 9 years old, he lost his mother. That was when he did do his first communion, but the same year, just before his first communion, his mother died, and that had a great impact on him. So he grew up after that with his father. He was very attached also to his older brother, who was a physician, a medical doctor. But 4 years later, after his mother died, his brother also died. He got some infection, some kind of fever, and died. So that left him alone with his father. So he lived in Warovici, this small town, until he was 18 years old. So from 1920 to 1938, he was in Warovici. And over there, he did do what a normal kid will do. You know, he participated in the sports. He was very good with sports. He played soccer, and he was very good skiing and so many other things. And one of the things from the beginning is that there were some Jewish people who live in Warovici, and from the beginning he was very good friends with them, and sometimes even when they didn't have enough people in their teams to play with the Polish people, he will join the Jewish team to make it happen. So he was always, I guess, from an inner conviction that everybody was the same in the eyes of God. You know, he was always reaching out to everybody, but especially to the Jews. We'll see that good disposition of his heart for the Jews. Now, I would like to give you some trivia information. Are you ready for this trivia information? Are you ready? All right. John Paul II visited 129 countries. 129 countries. How many of you had visited that many countries? All right. As Pope, he made 104 trips. So he went to every corner of the world. I wish to do that one day. Not as Pope, but no. But, I like to travel, and I think that's, an opportunity to get to know many other cultures and people and history as well, because as you go to another place, you are able to learn the history of that place, and then you have more data in your brain, which is good. He was 26 years, 5 months, and 18 days as Pope. That made him the third longest Pope in history. The first one, as you know, is St. Peter. He was in the papacy. It's believed that he endured from 34 to 37 years in the papacy, St. Peter. Then the second one was Pius IX. He was a Pope for 31 years, 7 months, and 23 days. And then the third one, St. John Paul II, 26 years, 5 months, 18 days. Isn't that great? I mean, he had plenty of time to do many things. In 26 years, you can do many things, especially if the Lord is prompting him to do all of these things. He was the first non-Italian Pope in 455 years. 455 years, all the popes were coming from Italy. I don't know why. I don't know, but that was the rule, I guess. And so then after 455 years, he became Pope, which kind of took everybody by surprise because I guess the world, was accustomed to have popes from Italy, not from any other place of the world. As a spiritual leader, he had a tremendous impact all over Europe and all over the world, but especially he really had the opportunity to challenge communism. That was one of the main things. And he could do so because since he grew up with all of these issues, and later on we are going to talk about that. He was working in a chemical factory and so on during the war, and he was a witness of the horrors of war. So then he had first-hand information and not only information, but he was a victim also of the war, so he could go and bring things very clearly about the evils of war. And he took every advantage possible to challenge communism, but not by force, only with the strength of the gospel. So when he was 18 years old, in 1938, he moved from Wadowice to Krakow. And over there, he started some studies at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, but also he went to work because his father was older now, and he took care of Karol Joseph Sr. So he got a job in a quarry, and he went to school, and that was his life. But 3 years later, in 1941, he found his father dead. And that also, created a humongous impact on him. That was like the last drop that, moved him to just going to the seminary and start his life as a priest, Remember that in 1939, just 2 years before his father died, World War II started in Poland on September 1st. The Germans invaded Poland, by air and, land, and they bombed all over. And that was the beginning of a very dark era for Poland and for the world. So in 1941, when his father died, he went to the Archbishop's residence in Krakow. I was there, and he went in secret, and he introduced himself to the Archbishop, and he asked him to receive him, to prepare him for the priesthood. And he started in a clandestine way. He was doing his studies, and then in 1946, on November 1st, he was ordained priest. His ordination, I was in the Cathedral of St. Stanislaw in Krakow. He was ordained in the basement, because he needed to. It was a very private thing. He didn't have family, so it was kind of a very quiet thing. Very few people attended. And then immediately after his ordination, he was sent to Rome. Now, you have to understand that, yes, the war was over in 1945, but in Poland, there was a problem because Poland was divided, during the war, Poland was divided between the Nazis and the Russians, And so Poland is a country that is between Russia and Germany and, these other countries here. So Poland had been always invaded. How unfortunate for that land. Always invaded, and during the war it was worse, because on the west Germany was taking part of Poland, and on the east Russia was taking part of Poland. And during the war, many times they conquered Krakow, Warsaw, and all of these places, and it was a fight, to conquer the land and between the Russians and the Germans. And the people, the Polish people really had a tremendous impact, suffering, pain, unfortunately. Now, in 1946, after the war, communism, after a treaty that was made in Europe and so on, Poland was under communism. So from 1945 to 1989, Poland is under Russia, let's say. So there was not that much freedom. I mean, they were free from the Nazis, but they they were under the rule of communism, and there was no freedom. Therefore, by the hand of God, John Paul was sent to Rome for 2 years to do a doctorate. By the way, John Paul was very smart. I mean, you had to see that he was doing all of these studies so quickly. He went to Rome and he did do his doctorate in Rome. He did do a dissertation on St. John of the Cross, and that's when he was exposed to the Spanish language, and I guess in no time he learned the Spanish language, and I suppose he in no time learned Italian, and I think that's the beginning of his this gift that he had for languages, But I think he was aided from above, because as you know, it's very difficult, and he was able to manage all of these languages. Everywhere he went, he was able to speak the language of the people. I even remember when I was in Colombia in 1984, I think he went to Colombia, and he even spoke the native dialect of some Indians, of some Indian reservation. I mean, I don't even know the language of them, and he was able to communicate with them in their native tongue. That's unbelievable. I couldn't believe, I mean, I saw it, but I couldn't believe that he was doing such a thing. Not even politicians or people from my own country were able to do that. And then here is the Pope coming for the first time to a country like Colombia in the middle of nowhere, and he is able to communicate with the people and to bring a message in their own tongue. It's just unbelievable. I mean, one thing is to say it here today, but another thing is to see it when he was doing that, how he moved the hearts of so many people. And he had that gift to go and touch people in the deepest way all over the world. So then, in 1948, after he finished this dissertation of St. John of the Cross, he got his doctorate and he went back to Poland. He was sent to a parish, and then in 1950 or 51, he started working at the Jagiellonian University. I hope I am pronouncing that well, And then he was doing some studies, but also he was a teacher over there, and he finished a degree in philosophy in 1954. So it tells you that he never stopped his studies. He was always searching for more and more knowledge, and he never finished. So after he got his degree in philosophy, and he worked at the university. 4 years later, he was named auxiliary bishop of Krakow in 1958. That was Pius XII who named him bishop, and he was ordained bishop in September 28 of 1958. 2 years later, 4 years later, in 1962, remember the council went from 1962 to 1965. 4 years later, he was, as a bishop, he was sent to Rome. He was called to Rome, let's say, for the Second Vatican Council. And he was one of the youngest in the council. remember he was made bishop when he was only, he was 58, so he was 38 years old, only 30 years old when he became bishop. And then 4 years later, he was in his 40s, early 40s, when he went to the council. He was one of the youngest in the council and one of the brightest. Remember, he already had finished this degree. It's not only the degree in the spirituality and in the mystics, like St. John of the Cross, but also in philosophy. So he was fresh. And he had an impact in the council, especially he worked with the Guardian Spets, the document about the church in the modern world, and he made a big apportation. I mean, he was very involved with that document, let's say. And after the council, during the council finished in 1965, but during the council in 1964, he was named Archbishop of Krakow. And so he was installed as Archbishop of Krakow in January 13 of 1964. After the council was finished in 65 because of the great job that he did do in the council. As a token of appreciation, Paul VI made him cardinal. It was in 1967. On June 28, he became cardinal of Poland. And for almost 10 years, he was there until he became Pope. In 1978, October 16, he became Pope, and that's where we are going to speak more about, But anyway, he became Pope, and his life, of course, changed totally. In 1981, he was shot. You probably remember that. That was on May 13, 1981. It was a dark day, I guess. On May 1, 2011, he died on April 2nd, 2005, but on May 1, 2011, he was beatified by Benedict XVI. And then Francis, our Pope, waived the 5 years of waiting for the canonization, and he was canonized. He was made a saint on April 27, 2014. And his feast day is October 22nd. I'm going to quiz you with all of these dates and these trivia things. So, a very active life, always on the move, always learning, always doing something, very active, which is probably what helped him in his older age, and that's probably one of the reasons that he didn't quit, because he always was working and moving and doing. And I think even in his sickness, he couldn't stop. He needed to continue working. You saw him in the last years of his life, how difficult it was for him to exercise his ministry as Pope, but he kept going. Now, the approach that he gave to his papacy in regards to ministry was one of reaching out to those who admire the church, but also reaching out to those who oppose the church in a very polite and gentle way. John Paul II had a unique position to challenge communism and the Soviet Union. When he was named Pope, of course, coming from Poland, it was suspicious for the Union, for the Soviet Union, of what was going to happen with him. And the first thing that he wanted to do was to go to Poland, of course. And he was able to get the permission to go to Poland, despite their suspicions. And they allowed him to go to Poland in 1979, June of 1979. That visit really changed the history for Poland, and that was the impact of that visit is above everything else that he did do in Poland. Because in that visit, he was able to teach, preach, encourage, move crowds, and tell them, that they needed to, in a peaceful way, to maintain their identity, their moral values, their faith as Christians. That they needed to look to defend human lives, and he was very vocal everywhere where he went, in a peaceful way again, So we have to remember that anti-Semitism was something that was happening in Poland before the war and during the war. That was something big, not only in Poland, but also in Germany and so on. And one of the main things that John Paul II did do in his visit was to challenge that. He was really giving the dignity of the Jews, bringing them up, and he spoke in favor of the Jews. So he worked to restore the dignity of Polish Jews by befriending them and working to reunite families who survived the Holocaust. So that's one of the main signs that he started with. Then, as a result from his experiences, John Paul II worked to strengthen the ties between the church and the Jews. He labored to rid the church of many lingering forms of anti-Semitism. He makes every effort, and he didn't care about communism or anything, He made every effort. He made this one of his priorities in his visit to Poland, his first visit to Poland. But he not only did do this in Poland, he also did it all over the world. He was the first pope to visit a synagogue in Rome. And then he went to the Holy Land, and anyway, he spoke very clearly about this evil all over the nations. In his visit to Poland, his first visit, he went to Auschwitz. I was there, and he walked over there, and he went to the place where Saint Maximilian Kolbe was starved to death. And he prayed over there, and he denounced the horrors of war, and he put candle, how you call those, that will remain forever, eternal light over there. I was there. It just touched me when I was in that room, It's a very dark room. Auschwitz, I don't know if you had been there, but it's not a pleasant place to visit. It gives you the horrible feeling of pain and suffering over there. Anyway, he went to Auschwitz, and as a sign of the need for humanity to confront the sins it has committed, and for the need to work for reconciliation with the Jews. It's not that John Paul II didn't know about Auschwitz. Of course, he was from Poland. He lived close by, and as a Polish person, he probably went over there. But he made this official visit as Pope to be able to condemn the horrors of war and also to restore the dignity of the Jews, and he did it so well, you know. In 1986, he visited a synagogue in Rome where he referred to the Jews as our elder brothers and denounced any attempt to integrate anti-Semitism with Christianity, arguing that the two are incompatible. So he kept denouncing, he did do this in 1979, but he kept denouncing this because, this is an ongoing problem throughout history. Then, that's one of the first things that he was able to challenge in Poland and all over the world. Another thing is how he challenged communism. That's interesting. His experiences, as I said at the beginning, made him the best person to challenge communism. It's different if I'm going to go and challenge communism and I never was affected by it, but he knew what he was talking about, and he was a victim of the war and of the horrors of communism. So, I'm going to go back a little bit when he was a bishop. In 1950, or in the 50s, early 50s, he was involved with the young people in Krakow. He was always very involved with them. And he was encouraging a sense of independence in them, I think if you will be in a regime like that and you had the opportunity as a bishop, you will do the same, I suppose, to encourage the young people to look for freedom, look for for your rights and defend your rights. I think that's, and he did it, even with the consequences of the regime, he dared to do it. And the youth during this era were coming of age in a Poland devoid of peace and liberty. This was a highly dangerous undertaking since the communists forbade any and all forms of resistance to communist doctrine. These experiences had a profound impact on the youth, with many of them becoming leaders of Solidarity later on. Solidarity was created in 1980, but from the 50s, the basic work was already laid down there, by John Paul. Many of those young people became the leaders of Solidarity in 1950, 30 years later. So one of them is Lech Walesa, but we'll talk about that later. Excuse me. I had to drink this coffee before it gets cold, I'm fine, thank you, no. So, his experiences under the communist regime led him to develop a political direction, helping him to shape how he will approach his relationship with the communists. Wojtyla developed a subtle calmness in his dealings with the Communist Party. Consequently, they preferred to negotiate with him instead of his superiors, who tended to be more confrontational. He was smooth, It's like he knew he was going to be Pope. Anyway, so he had a charisma. He was able to, smooth people and, make people at ease. And so even from his early days, early years as a bishop. In 1979, during his visit, his aim was to inspire the crowds to believe in their intrinsic power to return Poland to a democracy. That was his main goal, to inspire the crowds, to move them to look, to change the regime and look for the ways that they were going to transform Poland from a communist country to a democratic country. So he had everything in his mind, very well planned. And then is when his motto, "Do not be afraid," started. He told the Polish people, the young people in Krakow, "Do not be afraid." And it became like his universal motto. You know, everywhere he went, he encouraged the young people and every one of us not to be afraid, especially if we were following the Lord and doing what was right. So that motto became a rallying cry against communist oppression. It provided comfort to the oppressed and the courage to stand firm in their convictions and work for change. His visit inspired Lech Walesa to form Solidarity in 1980. This is the first and only trade union not under the control of the Communist Party. You know, Solidarity was formed officially in 1980, and in 1989, they made a transformation from communism to democracy. I'm gonna make a couple of points here about his teachings, especially in this first visit to Poland, because he took every opportunity to really lay out the direction that they needed to follow. So in his teachings, he made his visit even more powerful as he identified himself with the people. He spoke about knowing the struggles and having been born in that place and knowing what was going on. So he made himself one of them, you know. He wasn't dictating from above, but he was, in a way, presenting himself as a victim of the communist life. And this caused great concern for the Communist Party in Poland as well as in Moscow. Then, in this same trip, he addressed the political government. He said many things, but I'm gonna just bring some few things here. During his address to the Polish government, St. Paul mentioned the social doctrine of the Church, which supports authentic progress and peaceful development of humanity. All forms of politics, economics, and cultures must collaborate to promote the good and well-being of the people whom they serve. And he emphasized the Church takes interest in the temporal aspects of humanity. In fact, it is part of the Church's mission to form a relationship with all dimensions of human existence. And he went on and on and on, and I think they were getting itchy and itchy and itchy as he was talking to the government. But then he was creating a vision and giving a mission to the people, so he needed to touch all of these different people. Then at Victory Square in Krakow, he spoke to the faithful, to all of the faithful. His main thing over there was to reaffirm the value of culture in a way, defend that culture. And he was appealing that, to the fact that Poland was Christian. And therefore, they needed to, that's part of the culture, it was a Christian culture. And he was encouraging them to maintain their values of their culture, including, of course, Christianism, because he knew that with Christianism, they could overcome everything. This was something the Pope wanted to impress upon the young, since they were the future of Poland and communism. Communism sought to suppress the culture and their identity, but the Pope reinforced the idea of defending the culture and their identity as a Christian country. This is something that he said about culture. Culture is an expression of man, a confirmation of humanity. Man creates culture, and through culture creates himself. He creates himself with the inward effort of the spirit, of thought, will, and heart. At the same time, he creates culture in communion with others. Culture is an expression of communication, of shared thought and collaboration by human beings. It is born of service of the common good and becomes an essential good of human communities. In closing his address, the Pope urged the youth to remain faithful to their heritage. He said, make it the foundation of your formation. Be nobly proud of it. Keep this heritage and multiply it. Hand it on to future generations. So he gave them the mission. Then he also went to denounce the horrors of war. He went to a concentration camp, and then over there he said, I don't know how to pronounce this. Auschwitz is a testimony of war. War brings with it a disproportionate growth of hatred, destruction, and cruelty. It cannot be denied that it also manifests new capabilities of human courage, heroism, and patriotism. But the fact remains that it is the reckoning of the losses that prevails. That reckoning prevails more and more, since each day sees an increase in the destructive capacity of the weapons invented by modern technology. Not only those who directly bring about wars are responsible for them, but also those who fail to do all they can to prevent them. And so on, he really denounced any kind of violence and war, and he made the Communist Party even more nervous with all of these speeches. The human dignity must be respected at all times, in all places, and by all people. He was very daring in that first visit, don't you think? I mean, knowing that he was under the scope, he was very daring. He didn't withhold anything. He just went on and gave the vision and rebuked what he needed to rebuke, and it's very impressive what he did do. Then he spoke about about the dignity of human work. As you know, communism is is a system that somehow make people just productive, entities, So he spoke about the dignity of the human work. He went to the shrine of the Holy Cross, and over there, in the same visit, he said this: Christ will never approve that man be considered, or that man consider himself merely as a means of production, or that he be appreciated, esteemed, and valued in accordance with that principle. Christ will never approve of it. For that reason, he had himself put on the cross, as if on the great threshold of man's spiritual history, to oppose any form of degradation of man, including degradation by work. Christ remains before our eyes on his cross in order that each human being may be aware of the strength that he has given him. He gave them power to become children of God. So, in other words, he was really rebuking from every angle. He was really rebuking communism in a very subtle way, but he was really creating a revolution, a peaceful one, but he was creating a revolution for the system over there in Poland. Then, in a homily in St. Stanislaw, he called all Christians, all peoples, to embrace the responsibility of human beings and to embrace the responsibility as Christians. And this is what I was referring to during the Mass, He, before his departure, the Pope challenged the Polish people to embrace these responsibilities. And he said, every person goes forward. He or she goes forward towards the future. Nations also go forward. So that's all humanity. To go forward, however, does not only mean to endure the exigencies of time, continuously leaving behind the past, yesterday, the years, the centuries. To go forward also means being aware of the goal. Christ has shown us the way, and in his farewell to his apostles, he has reconfirmed this once more. He told them and the whole church to teach and carry out all that he commanded, and know that I am with you always until the end of the world. So, he invited, as he was departing Poland, he invited all of them to continue the task of teaching and bringing the teachings of Jesus to everyone, and he invited to transform the human heart with the power of the gospel. Well, in conclusion, these final lines sum up John Paul's impact on Poland. It was to preserve the faith against a seemingly hopeless situation. The Polish people had been oppressed first by the Nazis and then by the communists, with seemingly no end in sight. John Paul provided courage and a path to maintaining fidelity to their culture, their history, and most especially their religious identity, which gives meaning to everything else. John Paul showed the flock in Poland how to stand against oppressive forces by embracing the gospel call to love everyone as God does. Because of this, communism fell in Poland without any uprising or violent forms of bloodshed. I was there last May, and what I saw was a different country, not what I had read about. It was a different country. I saw people laughing, many children. I saw people learning about their faith. I saw many, many children going from parish to parish. They have a beautiful custom over there. When they do the first communion, they ask the children to go and visit all of these holy places, all of these missions, and they have to go in their first communion gowns. It's like a witness to Christianity. So you see these children, especially if you go in May when I went, all over the places. I was wondering, well, do we have first communions here every day? And then I went and I asked the guide, and said, oh no, they have to go and they have to go in their communion gowns to, like for 3 or 4 times to different holy sites. That's a way that the children bring witness to Christianity. So what I saw is a country that is with hope in the Lord. I saw younger generations moving forward. As Christians, I saw a beautiful country. That was a beautiful experience. Of course, I saw the sides of pain and horror like Auschwitz, but I saw that there is hope and that country is moving forward. And hopefully, the horror of war will never visit that place ever again. Thank you very much.